recruitment during cycling. You can see the 6 authors there. First question, who's this?
Lance Armstrong.
Yeah, 7-time winner of the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong. Lance is actually modeling the 2 positions that this study looked at. On the left there, he's in the upright position with his hands on the top of the brake hoods. On the right, he's in the aerodynamic position. And you can see there's not a real big difference in his body, but yet there is, and that was the gist of the study, was looking at those 2 positions. How many of y'all were born in 1988? Yeah, no. On the left is Lance Armstrong. He's a professional triathlete, winning the Coca-Cola Sprint Championships in 1988 as a 17-year-old. Beat all the big names of the sport. And then on your right is yours truly, racing against, well, competing in a race that Lance was in. Doesn't really have anything to do with the study, but I just thought it was kind of cool. So, what are the importance of this study? 2 things, primarily, is performance and injury prevention. Any adverse effects on the upper body orientation with respect to leg movement is going to have an effect on performance. And then, like it says, 85% of triathletes and cyclists incur some kind of overuse muscular injury. And if the upper body affects that, that's a very important piece of information. So the question that was asked is, how does riding position affect leg kinematics in muscle recruitment? So what? So what if it does? This is the results of last year's Tour de France. That was kind of a close one, closer than usual. But first and second place after 2,000 miles and 92 hours of cycling, they were separated by 39 seconds, 0.012%. And you go all the way down to 10th place, which is the top American finisher. That's Chris Horner. He was 12 minutes back, which is still only 0.2%. So it doesn't take a whole lot to get the athletes at that level closer. So there's some importance. More importantly, well, as importantly, the last American winners of the Hawaii Ironman were Tim DeBoom in 2002 and Karen Smyers back in 1995. Olympic triathlon, there's been 3 of those. Americans have never won gold or silver. We won 1 bronze and 3 Olympics. So if we can figure out a way to improve our performance with something as insignificant as lower leg movement, that's very important. So some background. The first study was real cool. What they looked at was the subjects would be sitting in a chair, and with their eyes closed, they would draw with their finger a geometric shape, and then they would tilt their head either left or right 25 degrees, and they would redo it. And they found that depending on the direction of the head tilt, the orientation of their geometric shape was in the opposite direction. What that showed is there a relationship between the body segments and the distal limb movement. So that also applies to the legs. The other 2, the head, neck, and trunk positions, show that there's a reference frame. Your arms and your legs can't operate in space. They have to have a reference frame which your body provides. Finally, the Salzburg was a body orientation in cycling, and their results actually turned out different than results of this study. There's a reason for that. I'll talk about that later. So the hypothesis, they actually had 2 of them. Aerodynamic riding position would be associated with altered leg kinematics and muscle recruitment in novice cyclists. They have no influence on leg kinematics or muscle recruitment in elite cyclists. And then another one, the aerodynamic riding position would be associated with altered leg kinematics and muscle recruitment in elite triathletes. All that meant was the guys who cycle a lot, they wouldn't have any change when they change position. The triathletes and the novice, they would have a change in leg kinematics. So their subjects, 10 triathletes, cyclists, and novices. You can see if you look at the distance that they cycled, the triathletes and the cyclists were pretty close. These guys are world class. They're not just your average Joe like me. These guys were Olympic level cyclists and triathletes. So the cyclists are riding a lot. And in addition to riding over 250, 300 miles, they were running 35 to 40 miles a week too. So that may have had some bearing. The novice, you can see, don't ride a whole lot, but they are riding. So here's what they did. It was a 17-minute experiment over the course of, they had a 5-minute warm-up, and over the course of 12 minutes, they had 2 experiments where they'd be in the upright and in the aerodynamic position. They would capture data for 1 minute. The variables they were looking at was EMG data of the lower leg, as well as crank orientation and the kinematics using a camera to capture where the leg was to look at range of motion. The variables, all the muscles of the lower leg, tibialis anterior, posterior, the peroneus longus, the soleus, and the gastroc lateralis. And the analysis of variance, statistical analysis of variance was done on the linear models, and then a post hoc analysis of the point models. Can't really see that. All right, so the methods, these are how they control all the variables. They all rode their own bikes. They're all on a magnetic trainer and clipless pedals. They all pedal at about 90 to 95 RPM, which is standard for a competitive cyclist. Their intensity, RPE of 15. Same gear for both the conditions, and then they put markers on the cranks and the pedals so they could look at that as well as on the body. So what happened? Well, the cadence, like I said, that stayed the same, not different between either the groups or the riding positions. The kinematics were not different, and that was different than what they had hypothesized. So there was no like kinematic difference for any of the groups or the positions. Aerodynamic position actually had a greater secondary EMG amplitude. What that means, these are your primary muscle movers in cycling, but your secondary down your lower leg, they actually had a large change in EMG. So they were being used a lot, but only in the novice cyclists and the triathletes, not in the competitive cyclists. And here's what it looked like graphically. The competitive cyclists here, they didn't hardly change. They stayed at about 0, whereas the triathletes and the novice, they had a huge variance in their EMG amplitude. Another thing they found, that the trained cyclists had greater variability. This was kind of unusual. I didn't expect this either. Particularly, you can see that of the 4 of the 5 muscles, they had a large variability. And the reason being that the cyclists are not used to going down in the aerodynamic position, but 90% of their riding is actually done upright. So there was some variability associated with the riding position that even trained cyclists are not used to. And here's graphically how that's represented. Again, you can see that the novice and the triathletes had a large variability, but a small difference between the upright and the aerodynamic position. All right, so discussion, again, orientation did not, which was theorized or hypothesized, was not supported. Increased stiffness of the leg. And that is, if you're using one muscle, you want to relax the muscle that's not being used. Well, the cyclists were able to do that. The triathletes and the novice were not able to. So increased stiffness of the leg may lead to injury, higher metabolic cost. Finally, there's some limitations to the study. RPE for cycling intensity, not a real good indicator. The triathlete body position, and lastly, feature studies, effects on fatigue. Maybe the fatigue would control the movement. That may have the similar effects, and also the effects of cycling position on subsequent running in triathletes. So they're wearing out their legs, and when they go to run, there's going to be an increased demand. So that's it. Any questions? All right, we'll start with Chris since he always has questions.
You said that we've only won one bronze medal in the triathlon. What in particular do you think that is the reason why we haven't succeeded in triathlon?
Yeah, well, I think it's why we haven't won the Ironman either. It's our country doesn't. This is one reason. Our country really doesn't support from the government level higher level sport research like they do in Australia. Like they do in England, where the last winners have come from. This is an Australian study. They typically kick butt in the Olympic triathlon. So that's one reason. Of course, why do we always lose in soccer too? Who knows? Ellie, anything?
This study pretty much focused on like this top position or on the bottom.
Right.
How do you think it would change if we actually looked at like aero bars, which I know one of your pictures?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's why I thought it was a limitation, because triathletes are used to be in a very aerodynamic position, which uses considerably different muscles. So I think that was a limitation of the study. And the way I looked at what they're trying to do is there's so many cyclists out there analyzing different muscles. They were looking at a very small muscle that doesn't get used a lot, so if they can figure out something with that one, looking at those two positions, they may have an effect on performance. So I think there would be a lot bigger changes if they went to that considerably different aerodynamic position.
Did they mention anything about different styles of bikes or also the carbon bikes, lighter bikes, heavier bikes, anything like that?
No, in fact, that was one of the ways to control the variables, is they all rode their own bikes. They didn't want to put everyone on one bike, which would, you use carbon fiber, you may generate force a lot better than you would if you're on a steel bike. That all the energy goes into the bike. So I guess as I'm saying that, that may have been a limitation too, is if they had different style bikes, the energy, the forces that were being applied would be reacted to differently. But no, there's nothing about which bikes are better. Is that what you're
I
asking?
just didn't know if they mentioned that as a part of the results of the study. If they're-
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and it was not addressed. Okay, great, thanks.